Next speaker, who will do a talk called Your App is Boring, How to Stand Out in the World of Web3. And your speaker, give him a round of applause, is Nathan Snell.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody here at ETH Barcelona. Appreciate the time today. As you said, I'm Nathan Snell. I'm co-founder and CEO of Raleon. Raleon's a Web3 marketing platform, and we really spend a lot of time helping projects grow, so helping convert users, helping grow community. But that said, I don't really want to spend time talking about Raleon today. I'm here actually to talk about really you all and the projects that are here, the projects that are building in this space, because honestly, that's what's most important. Before I do that, however, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So first, I'm curious, just a little bit of interaction here. By raise of hands, how many of you have seen the Raleon QR code or actually done some of the quests that are present here at the event? So curious, raise of hands. Awesome. So that about matches that. We've actually seen that about 30 to 35% of all the folks that have been at this conference have done different quests. I think we've seen about almost 700, a little bit more than 700 quests have been started overall, which is really great. I mean, when you think about a conference, the engagement has been awesome. We've been giving out prizes. The feedback has been really cool. If you haven't done it, so we are actually at 3 p.m. today releasing an NFT. It's personalized based on what you've done at the conference, the different quests that you've done, and there's a rarity to it. So if you haven't actually scanned anything, I'll throw this up, I think. Next. We'll try this one. No? Do I go back? Not sure how to get next here. I've only got 2 directions to go. There we go. Thank you. I don't know if that was me or not. So, this is free XP. If you have not started or you haven't played but you want an awesome NFT, or you are playing the game and you want to get higher in the leaderboard, this boosts your rarity. So this is part of how it works. You can get sort of engaged in the app and everything. So this is a little Easter egg as a thank you for coming to the session. So I'll give that a minute. What we're going to talk about today, though, is not quests and Easter eggs and fun things. We're talking about what makes a project boring, what makes a dApp boring, and really how do you go about engaging community, how do you go about growing. So to do that, again, on the interactive side here, I'm going to ask you guys a series of questions. You don't have to respond. It's okay. Don't feel any pressure. But I'm going to actually call out a number of sort of phrases and words. What I want you to do is to think about what is the dApp that you think I'm describing as I describe these things. All right, so what's the dApp that you think I'm describing? So if I said, this is the easiest way to trade, or you can earn more fees, it's the most gas-efficient trading, it's got the best slippage prevention, or the best pricing. What dApp do you think I'm describing? Is it SushiSwap? Is it Uniswap? Is it Matcha? Maybe it's 1inch. I know, it's unfair. It's a trick question. It's all of them. Because this is actually how these dApps, if you go and look at their sites, or frankly, if you look at a lot of the DEXs out there, describe what's great about their DEX. To be clear, I am not at all trying to, trying to insult these DEXs. I love them all. We've got friends at, at all these DEXs. We use them regularly. So let's shift into another example with this. So your shoes are boring, right? Same idea. I happen to like shoes. That's why I have on-brand shoes. So again, I feel like I can poke fun at this the same way that I do plenty of trades. So same exercise, right? So I'm gonna lay out some stuff that describes shoes, and I want you to think about what brand do you think I'm describing when it comes to shoes. So they're innovative, right? They're comfortable. Honestly, that one I think is funny because I would never buy somebody that said, you can get the most uncomfortable shoes. Give us money. That seems odd. But they're durable, classic. It's got celebrity endorsements, right? All great things. So am I talking about Nike or am I talking about Adidas? And again, the irony here is that these are the most common words that both of these companies use to describe their shoes. So the point with this, right, is that not so much that you should use this particular language, but it's that if you think about Nike and you think about Adidas or you think about Uniswap, for example, these are all big companies, right? I mean, Nike is a global billion-dollar company. Like, they clearly have done a great job differentiating. They clearly have an awesome audience. And yet, right, the language is actually fairly similar. So how do they not be boring, right? If you look at Uniswap or 1inch, right, clearly standing out, clearly have great products. What are they doing to not be boring? And honestly, it's all about how you engage or how engaged your community is, right? That's what they spend a lot of time focusing on. Because what they realize is that in reality, engagement creates loyalty. right? So engagement creates loyalty. And that's where when you think about something like a Nike and the drops that they do, or if you think about a Uniswap, for instance, these are companies, these are projects that have spent a lot of time not just focused on the things that they say, but on creating an awesome and engaging and amazing experience for their users. And that's not just user experience, although that's important. It's also the way that they actually interact with their community. So in this case, for example, if you actually look at Uniswap, and I wrote about this actually in January on Bankless, with Uniswap, so they actually helped pioneer the airdrop. And what they did is, and part of why I say they pioneered it is they're one of the early ones to do it, but what was so unique about what Uniswap did is, unlike many projects today, they didn't actually tell anybody they were going to do it. They actually just one day announced and said, hey, by the way, if you've been trading with us, there's a bunch of tokens that are waiting for you, right? You can govern with it and so on and so forth, so it was this retroactive thing that they did, and as a result, right, it built a huge amount of loyalty, within their community. Now, it also did drive user acquisition and drove awareness because suddenly people were like, wait, what just happened? Well, I want some of that, and they traded and so on. So it did help with the awareness side, the user acquisition side, but it showed a strong emphasis, right, from a crypto standpoint on the community, the value of driving loyalty and that sort of thing. Nike and Adidas, again, they do the same sort of thing, right, of thinking about how do they drive loyalty, not just try to create attention, awareness. How do they create raving fans? Because at the end of the day, if you don't have a lot of raving fans, if you don't have customers that are sticking around, you're not likely to succeed. So let's make this a little bit more tactical. So we're going to jump into the growth funnel. Because at the end of the day, we've been kind of talking at a strategic level, but when it comes to growing and being successful as a project and everything else, you do have to think about growth. You have to think about your audience. And to me, one of the most amazing things, right, is if you look at a Uniswap, if you look at a 1inch, if you look at Nike, they think about all the stages of this funnel. But what's surprising is that a lot of times, a lot of the projects that we talk about in this space, in the Web3 space, in the crypto space, they tend to be overly emphasized here on awareness. And awareness is great, right? It's important. Right? At the end of the day, if nobody knows about you, then you're not going to be particularly successful. However, awareness is also arguably the easiest part, right? You load money into a machine, whether that's ads, whether that's sponsorships, whether that's endorsements, what have you, and awareness sort of happens. And I'm oversimplifying some, but at the end of the day, it's sort of the easiest part of the process, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can create awareness. The challenge, though, right, is if you think about, again, like the best brands out there, really they spend most of their time focused on the conversion and loyalty side, where most Web3 projects forget that aspect of it. Right? They spend so much time, trying to pump or being, exposed or getting awareness, they forget to think about, okay, so now I have, 1,000 people that, that come to my site or to my dApp, to my community. How do I activate them? How do I make sure that experience is great? How do I keep them loyal? And frankly, and we'll actually show some data on this in a minute here. If you think about Blur, for example, right? So Blur, if you're not familiar, is an NFT marketplace. They focused on pro traders. We'll kind of talk about that in a little bit. But Blur's rise to success isn't because they did the best awareness. It's actually because they spent the best time focused on conversion and loyalty. They call it seasons, it's loyalty. Right? They spent the most time and they made one of the best experiences in crypto and Web3 today around how do you keep users engaged? How do you make sure that they continue to stay engaged? How do we make sure the community is growing, that they're having fun, and they're getting value? Right, so that's some of the importance there. Nike, again, has a similar sort of focus. So it's something that we can kind of learn, we can borrow ideas from the Web2 side while going into, and while bringing it into the Web3 space. So, am I broken again? I don't know which direction I'm... Is that me? That's not me. There it is, okay. So, just to continue to make this tactical here, I like to kind of start off high. Let's give us sort of the frame of thought. Now let's get into something really practical, right? So if you've got a project and you're wanting to go and you want to focus on growing, you want to stand out, right? The way that some of these other projects are, the way that the Uniswaps of the world, the Blurs of the world are. To me, and there's a lot more to it than this, but from a 20-minute standpoint, there's sort of 3 areas that you can really spend time and focus on that I think are great starting points. It really lays the foundation of how you can grow from a project standpoint. And the first is identify your ideal customer profile, or what's called the ICP. I can't tell you, I'd say probably 90% of the projects that we talk with, we always like to start off with a question of like, what's your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? Right? And most folks, right, especially if you're earlier stage and you're saying, oh great, well, I want to build awareness, right? I want to bring in users and everything else. Awesome. You should. If you don't have people coming in, that's a problem. Again, converting them is a harder problem, but nonetheless, if you don't have people coming in, that's a problem. So we ask, okay, great, well, what kind of users do you want? And honestly, the answer most of the time is, well, like everyone. It's like, okay, well, like if you're a DEX, and I said, great, so you're a DEX now, who's your ideal target? Anybody who trades crypto. Like, that's a large market, but that's really difficult to actually penetrate, right? Because ultimately, if you're targeting everybody, you're not really targeting anybody. You can't really have like a good conversation with somebody if the answer is, oh, well, I just want to talk to everybody. So it needs to be specific, right? So as a contrast, if you're a DEX and your answer is, oh, well, I'm targeting retail-specific traders that on average trade less than $5,000 per trade. Okay, like is that a smaller market to start in? Yes. But like you actually can say something that's meaningful to them, because gas efficiency probably matters a lot to somebody who's on average doing a $5,000 trade, right? Because suddenly that eats into the profits quite a lot if the gas fees are really high. So that's some of the idea of that ideal customer profile. The second one is need to use what I like to call your secret weapon. And your secret weapon, I'd say again in the Web3 space, it's often overlooked. It's your dApp, right? It's your app. If it's a project, if you're a project or a protocol rather, it's your site. And again, if you look at Blur as an example, and I'll show some data on this in a second, Blur did a fantastic job using their secret weapon, using their site, right? And even on the ICP side, on the ideal customer profile, right? Blur said, hey, look, we are targeting NFT traders to start. And then they released the lending product, right? Which again is very much geared towards folks that are trying to do sort of pro trading from an NFT standpoint. So again, they have a very targeted audience that they started with. And on the same token, Blur has the season system. They've got a great website. They've got different sort of onboarding things that come up to convert users. These are all tools, right, of using their sort of secret weapon, their own site, to be able to drive conversions and to drive loyalty with the season stuff. And yet, when we look at our data, it's amazing because actually, if you look at the number of say of dApps that are out there that have what I'd call at-risk users, if you look at how many of those at-risk users before they fully churn come back to the dApps site before they churn, it's at least 60% on average. So that means if you think about it, if you had 5,000 active users, or if you had 5,000 users that were at risk of churning in a given month, that means that more than half of those users are actually coming back to your dApp or to your site to try to re-engage with you, and ultimately don't and end up churning out. Right? That's why I say this is sort of the secret weapon, right? It's one of the easiest tools that you have and most available tools that doesn't really cost you money to be able to re-engage these users. So if we look at Blur as an example, so this is some data from our analytics side of our system. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of really drill in on here is I looked at the number of highly engaged Blur users. So I defined this as my own definition. These were users that have used Blur for 3 months in a row. So that's they've traded, they've listed something, they've placed a bid on something, 3 months in a row. So this month, last month, and the month before. So that's a pretty high degree of engagement, right? This is somebody who is actively engaged with Blur, actively using the products. And yes, and if you look at the chart, like the number goes down, but what you begin to see, right, is it starts to plateau, and then you begin to hit the consistent and true user base, right? And then actually you start to see it growing, right? So you can see this idea of moving sort of out of the awareness boring category into my true customer base, my true ideal customer profile. And then some of this too, I think, is frankly driven by season two's likely coming to to a closer fruition. So you see the activity begin to pick back up. But again, that actually shows the power of the secret weapon, if you will, of them using their site, of them driving more engagement and more activity. So it's pretty awesome. And frankly, there's some other really interesting data too, where if you actually look at OpenSea, OpenSea actually has pretty significant engagement even across the Blur user base. So I think it's something like at least 15% of Blur users are still actively using OpenSea, for instance. So that kind of shows another example of like the power of actually using the dApp itself to drive engagement, and that's without OpenSea having like a loyalty or a true sort of loyalty system like Blur does. So that's using your secret weapon, right? That's some of the power and benefit there. So last one here, it's important to measure, right? So if we think back to the funnel, if you don't know, how many people are coming to your dApp, if you can't measure your awareness, if you don't know how, what your conversion percentage is, if you don't know how many users are staying or leaving, it's really hard to stand out, right? It's really easy to fall into the boring category when you don't know if you're being boring, right? And measurement is sort of a fundamental tool to be able to understand, well, like, are you standing out or are you more in that boring category? And frankly, like, if you look at it, like the crypto landscape is littered with DEXs that haven't measured and don't stand out, right? And as a result, they're not at sort of the level of, a Uniswap or a Matcha or a 1inch, or even call it a Camelot or a QuickSwap or what have you, right? And it's because they're not doing sort of the right things to effectively measure and understand what are the things that are working and what are the things that may not be working. So I wanted to make sure we had some time for questions here at the end. I don't know how to switch to the question thing, but if there's any questions in the audience, happy to take it. And I guess I'll sort of wrap up too. If you think about the things that we talked about, and even what we at Raleon focus on. So we have a lot of analytics around dApps, our different projects. You've seen and sort of experienced our embedded Quest capabilities. All of that, right, is geared towards the same thing. It's geared towards being able to understand what's actually going on, so that way at the end of the day, you can actually take action on it. Our philosophy tends to be one of, data is awesome and it's great, but actions are better, right? At the end of the day, you can know plenty about who your users are, but if you can't do anything about it, if you can't re-engage them, if you can't make them loyal, it doesn't really matter. So, with that, I thank everybody for your time.